Hello everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for the version 12.1 community webinar. We're very excited about this new release, and Dirk Morris, our founder and Chief Product Officer, is here to go through all the new features and updates in this release. I'm your host today, Shannon Miles. I'm the Product Marketing Manager here at Untangle, and we also have a few of our other team members online to help answer questions throughout. Just a few housekeeping rules before we get started. If you're having audio issues, please just make sure you're selecting the correct audio preference on the right-hand side. If you do choose to dial in, to select the phone option, you will need to dial in and use the access code provided. As I mentioned, any questions you have, please just submit them through the questions box. We have people online to help answer questions, as well as Dirk will go through questions throughout the webinar. So with that, I'll pass it over to Dirk and he'll get started.
Thanks, Shannon. Thanks everybody for joining. We're again excited to be doing this and showing off all the new features. We've got a whole lot of new stuff in 12.1 that I think people will be really passionate about. So with that said, I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. As she said, please type in questions. We have the questions up, so I will try to cover as many questions as I can as I'm going through it. And then we'll loop back at the end and try to cover questions that I didn't quite get to. And as always, reach out to us at support if we didn't get to your question. So as always, I'm going to go to wiki.untangle.com, which has our documentation. Click on changelogs and click on the 12.1.0 changelog. And this describes most all of the major changes in 12.1. So I'm going to go through these and show you kind of some of the new stuff that we have available, but you can read this on your own. So let me dig right in. One of the major things you'll notice, actually before I jump in, 12.1.0, as always, we're going to do rolling upgrades. So if you are a 12.0 user right now, you may not see the upgrade available. So the way we do this is as the weeks come over, we'll roll them out generally to the population. If you really want to have it now, you can reach out to us at support@untangle.com or jump on the forums and request to be in the quote priority queue. But you don't need to do that. You will, within a couple weeks, have the upgrade available to your existing server. As always, you can actually download and install a new server if you want and just play with it, or load it up in VMware or whatever. Or jump over to demo.untangle.com if you just want to click around and see what it's all about. So with that behind us, now I'll jump in to the new administration interface. So a lot of you will notice right off the bat that there's a lot of changes, and we just made a lot of changes in 12.0, but now there's even more changes in 12.1. We went from a left side navigation bar to a top navigation bar. The navigation is unchanged, so it's still the dashboard, apps, config, and reports, but now it's along the top. The reason we did this is because ultimately our goal is to become more and more responsive, which basically means responsive means it works, the UI works on any device, be it your phones or your tablets or so on. So if I shrink this window, you will notice that the top changes. So right here you get these small icons, and if I shrink even more, which is what it would look like on your phone, you get the hamburger menu. It's the same menu, it's just now it's much easier to access on your phone. And again, the dashboard is completely responsive, so this is the same dashboard I was just looking at. It just does a new layout as the window gets wider or smaller and so on. So that's the reason we went to this top menu. It does take some getting used to, but now that I've been using it for a while, it's actually much, much, much better. The other major change you'll notice is the dashboard has a lot of new widgets. We redid the widgets, we redid how the layout works, we simplified a lot of things, we have a whole new graphing package, so the graphs look completely different. So let me just go over some of the widgets real quick. On a new install, this is the default dashboard. As always, you can customize what's on it, so if you have your particular desires that you'd like to see, you can throw whatever you'd like on here, but this is the default. Information just shows all sorts of information about your server. This is a custom server. If you had a U50, it would say U50 here or something like that. All the different statistics about memory, disk, and so on. Resources shows how many of your system resources are currently in use. This server has a lot of memory, so not very much is being used, which is not a surprise. This is only a, let's see, probably 50-ish host network, so it's not a very big network, and it's got a ton of RAM. So swap is totally unused because we have so much memory, and then how much disk is used. And this is, again, a huge server, so not much disk is used in this case. But that's just an overview of system resources. CPU load is a special dedicated widget to show you how much your CPU is being used. And again, this is load, not utilization. In general, we don't show utilization because I just think it's not a very useful metric. And the load is pretty low on the server because, again, this is like 8 cores or 4 cores, which is more than big enough for this network. But if there was a lot of load, you would see this graph go up. And this graph is scaled based on the number of cores you have. Network information shows all sorts of statistics about what your network currently looks like: total sessions, total scan sessions, total bypass sessions, active devices and hosts, and also a couple buttons to get to these. Host is basically unique IP addresses, devices is unique MAC addresses, and sessions is, of course, sessions. And again, you can get to these 3 up here, which are very frequent if you're in here playing around a lot and you want to see what's going on in your network, or you want to do debugging, or just see what's going on. That's the place to go. Network layout's a new one. Basically, we wanted a kind of high-level view of what your network looks like. And essentially what it does, it puts your WAN interfaces on the top. We have 2 WAN interfaces in this case. So this server is connected to the internet and 2 different ISPs, external and Comcast. Comcast in this case is actually just for failover. So if you notice closely, it's not actually has any data going across it. That's because this is the primary connection in this case. And that's actually what we're broadcasting through right now. And then we have 2 internal networks in this case. One is a wireless separate, and one is our internal network, which I'm on right now. So again, you can see data coming in here, going out here, and coming in here, going out here. So this is just a very high-level view of what your network looks like and the different data rates of each different segment. Map distribution, and I'll get into geolocation a bit more, but at a very high level, it's where your data is going at the moment. It looks basically at the current sessions. So if I go back to sessions and I look and I see server country, there's somebody talking to the Netherlands, a lot of different sessions open to the United States, one to Japan, Samsung, so that's probably somebody's phone, that's an Android. So if I go back here, let me go back over, you can see, well, there was one session to Japan, and there's a whole lot of activity in the United States. Obviously, we're based in California, so, and it looks like GoToMeeting is in Southern California. So this basically is just a high-level view of what's going on in your network by the map. The bigger the circle, the more throughput is going there relative to the other circles. Network interface usage, we had this in the old version. It's now a little bit smoother because we have a different graphing package. But it basically just shows you by interface what the receive rate is at the current moment. And then from there, it's a whole bunch of different report entries. I won't jump into each report entry. You can basically pick and choose all the different report entries you want. There's a couple that we added by default now because we've now improved how it works. And one of those is top host names usage and top applications usage. If you just want to dive in and see what your top application uses, it's just basically a stacked area graph. So that's what it's looking like right now. And you can also zoom in these, by the way. Now, you didn't used to be able to zoom. So now you can zoom in and take a look at the data and then zoom back out. And as always, you can kind of hide stuff if you don't want it and if you just want to focus on some amount of data. Or the little arrow means I want to go specifically to that report entry. So by default, it shows the last hour. But let's say I wanted to dig more into that. So this is over the last day. This is the top host names usage by bandwidth. So obviously, the network was not very active late at night. In fact, we had a power outage last night, a scheduled power outage. So there was no traffic literally during that power outage. But let's say we want to investigate here. Okay, there was one machine that used a lot of bandwidth around 6 p.m. and that was that host. So I could go look more into that if I'd like. But basically, the arrow sends you to the report for that dashboard entry. So if I wanted to dig more into that, just click that and go from there. All right, management of the dashboard. Click on Manage widget. We changed the way this works a little bit. Now there's a little hide icon, so I can say I want to get rid of these, or I don't want to see these, or I can click add, as I said earlier, and basically add any report entry I want, including the ones that I create custom. And I'll go into that a little bit more in a minute, but it works very similar to 12.0, where you basically say I want a custom report entry. Maybe I want to see little Timmy's web filter activity instead of all web filter activity. I create that custom report entry, and then I can add it to my dashboard. All right, give me 2 seconds to look at these questions. Please define bypass sessions. Does this mean unprotected on those sessions? So bypass sessions means the sessions aren't being scanned at layer 7, which is very normal. So for example, if Untangle itself does a DNS lookup, it does not scan its own session. So those will be bypassed. Bypass rules, any traffic to the Untangle server itself, like my administration session, is bypassed. So bypass basically means it's not scanned at layer 7. That's not a bad thing. In fact, a lot of times you don't want to do that. You don't want Untangle to scan its own traffic, because then you have a circular dependency. So no, in general, the bigger the network is, the higher number of scan sessions you're going to have, and then the lower number of bypass sessions. But then again, you may want to go look at this and say, well, am I scanning stuff I shouldn't be? The dashboard is global, so administrators will all have the same dashboard and all have the same settings. In fact, that's true of settings entirely. I see a couple feedback things. All right, I'm going to keep moving on. Again, I'll look at sessions, or I'll look at questions occasionally throughout, but let me jump back to the change log. One of the other things we changed administration, so in the apps, we've changed how this works a little bit. Nothing major. You won't find the adjustment to be hard or anything, but the way we change racks and so on. Let me show the different skin, because the other skin has changed quite a bit. So if I go to admin, skins, and I pick, let's go with simple gray. So it'll take a minute to change the skin. And then it'll log me back in. So this is the other way to view apps. So this is the, quote, simple skin. The benefit of this one is, unlike the rack, this one is completely responsive. So as you squeeze it down, this is what it would look like on your phone. So again, we're moving towards a completely responsive UI. So step 1 was change how this app layouts works. So if you want a responsive UI, the simple skin is a much better option. And obviously as it gets wider, it switches back to the widget view. But basically this is the same thing as the rack, it's just shown in a different way. Again, if you click on web filter, it goes in the web filter settings just like you're used to. I think I covered most of the dashboard and most of the new widgets. Reports, let me jump into reports. Reports, we have changed the way navigation within reports works. And this will be much simpler. So if you go to reports now, essentially you've got all the same categories, but now it's viewed here in the right. So I can go directly to one of the ones that I see on there by clicking on web usage. I just got logged out. I don't know why it's logging me out. That's fine. So, and again, you can zoom. We have the new graphing package here. Everything's changed. These have changed a little bit. So if I reset, I can go to group columns. I can go to overlap columns. And the nice thing, actually, let me show a server that's a little bit better. Let me switch to this one. I can show you how columns now regroup as you zoom in. So instead of showing you 8 million columns, it'll now intelligently size the columns. So if I go to, let me look at, say, spam. This server's pretty slow though, so while that's running, I'll switch back. But basically, when I zoom in, it breaks the columns apart. And you can do group columns, overlap columns, or stacked columns. So stacked is new. But essentially, this reports viewer is also completely responsive. So I can actually look at my reports on a phone now, and what happens is I get this drop down instead of having the left-hand side thing. So I can still pick and choose exactly what I want to see, and it'll just show me the graph. And all the same functionalities there on your tablet or your phone that would be in the major UI. It's just when you make it big, these things are over here on the left for easier navigation, but you can always hide them, and they automatically hide themselves if you shrink your browser down and you're trying to look at it on a phone. So here's a good example of if I zoom in, it breaks apart the bars, so I can zoom in as far as I want and get as much detail as I want, and then I can reset my zoom. As you can see, this server gets mostly entirely spam. You get like 1 to 2 emails an hour at the most of real email and a lot of spam. And overlap columns would look like this. I can do the same thing where I zoom in. Say I want to know between those. At 2:35, I got 1 real email, and at 2:33, I got 1 spam, and then I can zoom back out. So I think you'll find the new reports browsing and the new graphing package to be much, much better, both more visually pleasing and more accurate and more usable. One of the very cool things we added was what's called session minutes. Without going too much into how that works under the covers, essentially, if I go to, so previously we had a table that stores all sessions. So a session could start, it's a web request, and it stores everything about that session, and that's in the database, and all the reports are looking at that, well, most of the reports are looking at that session table. We added now a session minute table. So what that essentially means is it's a much bigger table. Most sessions are very short-lived, so in that case they'll only have 1 row in the session minute table, but if a session lasts 10 minutes, it will have 10 separate rows in this table. Now the reason we did that is so you can track the behavior over time about the number of bytes throughout the session's lifetime. The reason that's important is because if we want to do very fine-grained reports about bandwidth usage over time, you need to record that information. So, I'm on this tiny network. Let me switch back to a more interesting network. Top applications usage. That's what allows us to do this graph, which is essentially showing you very accurate information about different session usage over time. And you can see Citrix GoToMeeting, we started this at about 10, and it uses about 400K, actually about 200 to 300K. It probably depends on what I'm showing on my screen, how much it uses over time. So you can see the Citrix GoToMeeting, since we started the webinar, uses anywhere from 500K bytes a second to about 100. So the sessions minute data, basically the long short of it is it gives you much more accurate information over time. Geolocation. So the way geolocation works is essentially it's part of the platform. When a new session is created, we look up the information to say what do we know about this IP or this IP. And in which case, if it's a private IP, it's obviously local. We don't know that information because it's on your network. But we can look up the information about the public IP, whatever it is. And we can also look up the latitude and longitude. Let me just show all these as best we know it. So here you can see this server we think is somewhere around this server, latitude and longitude. So every single session that we start up, we put this information in here. So it's used for things like this. You can also do top countries and reports now. There's several places where you can look at your sessions by country. But also you can now do all sorts of things based on rules using the country. So you can, in any rule now, have client and server country. So if I click there, I can now say, well, I can either specify a country If the client country is from Greece, then you can do whatever you like. Or you can specify in custom a whole list of them, whatever you'd like. And anywhere you use rules, you can do that. So that means firewall, you can do that. Policy manager, you can do that. Bandwidth control, you can do that. Pretty much anywhere. Captive portal, I can only subject certain countries to captive portal. You can literally do whatever you'd like. Anywhere there's rules, now has the ability to match on client and server country of that session. All right, let me give me 2 seconds to look into questions. Is there any geofencing? Yes, that's what I just showed you. If you want to do that, which we don't normally suggest it, because once you actually look at your dashboard a lot, you'll notice that just blocking this to China, this is not necessarily a security threat. We can go look here and see, well, what was Hong Kong? It's a Microsoft session. So if you block China, in fact, that is the person sitting right next to me, Shannon. Shannon's computer is talking to Hong Kong, but it is a Microsoft session. So just be careful with fencing. Don't say I didn't warn you. That just because you want to block those countries because threats are coming from there. Most threats come from the United States. So you're free to block whatever you want with firewall rules. Just be aware that that can cause issues. Any update between configuration syncing between multiple Untangle devices using blah, 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 blah. I think this is a question more or less about Command Center, which yes, we are absolutely working on things like that. And in fact, if you, really quick without getting too sidetracked, if you go to untangle.com and you click on my account, let me just log into my testing account. You click on your servers tab, you'll notice this has changed a little bit, and there's some new things like showing you the CPU load and so on. So if you notice that some of these are actually filled out with information, and these servers are currently connected. This is my home server. It is currently connected to our Untangle cloud. One of the things we changed in this is settings. If you go and do settings about, or sorry, system, I think that's the right server. There's now two settings. One is called Connect to Untangle Cloud, and one of the other ones called Allow Secure Remote Access to Untangle Support Team. This one basically means it connects to our cloud and maintains a connection. The goal of this is several things. One is it will allow us to allow you to centrally manage your servers. So that's the goal of adding this setting, because when your Untangle server is connected to our cloud, you can manage it from your account. So that's the direction we're taking this. It also allows us to push out hot fixes and things like that if there's any really important fix that we wouldn't do through the normal channel. And then this setting controls whether or not our support team can have access to your server to support you. So if you call in with any issue, the first thing they'll do is say, please enable this so we can log into your server and see what's going on. So if you check this, which we would suggest you would, basically it means your server stays connected. And so in this case, you'll see, well, the CPU load is pretty low, but this server is currently connected to the cloud. So we have all sorts of information about what's going on with this server. And this server is actually this one right here that I'm showing you. So it's currently connected. And right now, we just have a couple options like manage subscriptions and view backups. This will be having more and more functionality over time. Things like I want to administer this server, I want to push settings to this server, I want to sync it with this one. So yes, there's plans to support that in the very near future. There's a question about reports. So we changed the way reports worked a little bit. So for example, there was before a view events button for this. Unfortunately, that caused a lot of confusion. People kept complaining. So essentially now you have to actually click on all email events. It's the same data. So in this example, the same data that you're viewing here, which Actually, this server has no. So let me switch. So the data that drives this is just this data. So before we had a button here that said go to this data, but it was causing a lot of confusion because people weren't necessarily understanding what that button does, so we removed it. So no, you have to actually click here to see your events now. And events are now, previously we had two different concepts. We had event log entries and report entries. Now they're just the same. They're just a different type of report. So if you want to see your events, you can click here and see every single spam event. This is the same data. It's all driven on the same. So if you click customize here, you will see this is driven off the same table as the other report. And by the way, you can actually create custom event log entries now. So like I said earlier, let's say you were specifically interested in one email address. I could say customize where sender equals something or receiver equals something, and then I could say that's my spam event log for only that one email address, and then I could save that, and I can even add it to my dashboard if I want. Can we limit traffic by geographic locations? Yes, that's why we added the geo thing. Again, use Firewall to do so, or whatever tool you want. Essentially, you can do anything you want by location now. Anywhere you could use rules, you can use geographical information. I'm reading through some of the questions. Geofencing may be too broad of a stroke to keep people out. Is there a way that we can geofencing may be too broad of a stroke? Just mute your... sorry about that. We're having little audio issues. Is there a way you can block specific IPs or ranges? Yes, firewall rules. Just click on firewall, click on help. It will open up, oops, pop-up blocked, allow. Click on help. It will take you to the firewall, click on rules documentation. You can create rules based on anything. Range of IPs, source IP, address, port, whatever. Tons of different things that you can block on. It just requires you to set up the rules that reflect the policy that you would like to have. All right, there's tons of questions. Sorry, I'm going to keep moving on because we've got a lot to cover and I want to make sure we get to all of it. For those of you on large sites, especially those of you with large amounts of UDP, you will see the performance of 12.1 is much better. Essentially what we did was applications, the nice thing about having this virtual network inside Untangle with all these different applications that basically work like virtual appliances, each one scans the traffic. So application control will take a look at it and say, I think this is this application. Usually what happens is after the first 10 packets, it says, well, okay, I know this is a GoToMeeting session, and I know everything about it that I'm going to know. That's all I can tell you. Web filter will basically say, okay, I've looked at this web session. I know it's going to this domain. Here's the URL. All these different apps will frequently reach all their decisions pretty early in the session. So if that's the case, they essentially do what's called releasing the session. They say, okay, I've done all I can do with this session. You can now exclude me from it because it obviously costs a lot to process all this data. So if you're doing a huge download of a zip file, Web Filter is going to look at the beginning and say, okay, the rest is just a zip file. Virus Blocker, on the other hand, may need to actually look at the entire zip because it needs to unzip it and scan it for viruses. But in cases where you have UDP sessions like BitTorrent coming in, often you'll say, okay, this is BitTorrent. Bandwidth control is going to say, here's the priority. Everything makes a decision fairly early on in the session, and at that point they'll release the session. So what happens is if all the sessions, all the applications looking at a session release it, essentially what we do is process the session now at layer 3, which gives you a huge performance boost because you're not bringing it up to the quote application layer or layer 7 to process the data. So in those cases, it's basically just an optimization that says on here, if you're scanning the session, you're going to scan all the important bits, and then after each app has said, okay, I no longer care about this, then if every app says that, it's going to release it back to layer 3. So for those of you on college campuses and things like that where people run BitTorrent, you're going to have a huge performance boost from that alone. So that'll be nice to get out there for you large sites, and also for home networks and stuff. If you're running on smaller hardware, it used to be if I ran a BitTorrent that would suck down 10 megs a second, the load on my server would be pretty high, sometimes 10, 20 load. Nowadays it's much lower because as all that data is transferred over UDP in often cases, now it can release it back to layer 3 once it knows everything it knows about it. And underneath the covers, we've also switched to Java 8 and a new garbage collector, so you should see a performance boost from that as well. The configuration of certificates has been improved quite a lot, so I won't go too much into this, but essentially now you can upload server certificates, generate server certificates, all sorts of things, create CSR, and then you say, where do I want to use this specific cert? So essentially you have a lot of different uses for certs. HTTP is the administration, which is this cert. SMTP is for SSL inspection for SMTP, and IPsec is for IPsec. So you can say, I want to use this cert for this case and this cert for this case. So this has been cleaned up quite a lot and should be a lot easier to use. IPsec VPN, we've now added IPv2. The main reason to do this was for people who have Apple devices that want to have forced VPN on demand that users cannot turn off. So if you're a school or you have your kids have iPads and you want them to be filtered even when they're off-site, that's now possible with IPv2 because you can go into Apple and say, use the VPN and don't allow the user to turn it off. So it will always on demand create a VPN tunnel back to your Untangle server and everything will be filtered. Bandwidth control, quotas are now handled a little differently. It used to be quotas were accounted for in bandwidth control of the app itself. Now it's actually accounted for separately, and bypass sessions count against the quota. So that's different than it was before, so just be aware of that. But obviously this was necessary to do this UDP performance thing. Since we're no longer scanning the sessions at layer 7, this allows us to release it entirely, which is necessary, but we still have to account for quotas. So we now account for all sessions, even the layer 3 sessions, in a separate manner. When will you have the ability to have lower privilege accounts so that everyone isn't an admin privilege? We will not. It's absolutely important that you understand, if you add administrators, that if you click the add button under admin accounts, and I'm going to be very, very explicit about this, that you are adding an administrator, and they have administrator privileges. If you do yes here, and you give somebody a login password, they now own your Untangle server. They can literally do anything, including delete the entire thing. If you do not want that person to be able to do that, do not, under any circumstances, ever click this add button. And do not ever click yes, I understand, if you do not understand. So that being said, if you want to give somebody access, there are certain ways you can do.
We're having audio issues.
Dirk, it's Katie. Yeah, we kind of broke up on that whole sentence. Could you go back over the admin privileges and repeat that, please?
Sure.
Can you hear us now, Katie?
Yeah, I can hear you just fine, but that part did break up for us.
Sorry,
and I think it's important to mention.
Sorry, we're having some audio issues, so Dirk, why don't you repeat?
Yep, I'm going to try one more time. Basically, I was just giving a very explicit warning that if you click add under admin accounts, admin is short for administrator. And that by adding an account here and giving somebody a username password, you are giving them administrator access to your server. Administrator means whatever you want to call it. Admin, administrator, root, super user. They own your Untangle server. So if you do not want somebody to be able to do anything, do not create an account for them. This is admin means administrator. They can literally delete all your settings. They can change any setting. They can create other administrators. This is all explained now when you click add. So if you want to give somebody access to the Untangle server, but not have an administrator, you cannot do that. Giving them access to admin means they're administrator. That being said, if you want to give them access to reports, we have a special report user. So you can go in here under users and you can give somebody access to reports, and they can view reports all they want, and they are not administrators. That means they can't change any settings. They basically can't do anything but view reports. So those are the two levels of access that you have in Untangle: administrators and reports users. We will almost certainly not add an intermediate one, just because we are not an enterprise product, and there should be no reason for people to click around the administrator UI if they're not administrators. Reading the other questions. Is Office 365 going to be an option to authenticate like Google and Facebook for Captive Portal? Maybe. Currently, our focus was on Google and Facebook. Let me actually just show you what he's talking about, which was the next entry, I believe, in the changelog anyway. There's an experimental feature. Again, experimental being the key word here. In Directory Connector, you now have a way to authenticate users against Google and Facebook. So what I do is I can turn that on, and I can turn on Facebook, and you can test with your Facebook login that it's actually working. The reason to do that would be is if you want to add a captive portal and you want people to log in or be able to log in with their Facebook credentials or their Google credentials. And the nice thing about that then is because if you go into the host table, it will automatically associate their username here that they signed in with. So you'll have their Google ID, their Facebook ID, or whatever they logged in with. And actually you can select which one you want to support or any. Oops, wrong place, just a second. So two things to be aware of. One is experimental. In that sense, it's not using the literal OAuth API that you should use because the user does not have access to that API at this point. So it's using an alternate technique that's not an official API. That's why it's experimental. We want to see how this works on a large scale. So I wouldn't go deploy this on your 2,000 person school and have them logging in with Gmail. I would first test it and let's see how it works as an experiment. Google could at any point literally choose to turn this API that we are using off. The other thing to keep in mind when doing this is the load created when authenticating those Google logins and Facebook logins is non-negligible. So if you have large networks, you may want to see what the performance is like before just rolling it out. Pick a subnet and see the load created by having all users log into Google, because essentially what it's doing in the background is opening up the Chrome session and authenticating that user to see if that user's legitimate. So obviously opening a Chrome session, even though it's not visually displayed, creates a lot of load on the server. So in those two ways, the new Google and Facebook authentication is experimental. So just keep that aware. Where it is, yes. Somebody asked, is there another kernel update? There is a new kernel update, but it's a tiny patch, so we're on the same kernel version that we were. If you want to argue about the administration users, you're welcome to, but ultimately at the end of the day, we do not have non-admin users, and it's your decision to use Untangle. If you give administrator access to people, they are administrators. I'm reading through questions. If we use Facebook authentication, do we allow anyone, or is there any access control based on Facebook user? So if you use Facebook authentication, it will then put their Facebook information in host. So the username will be here. So you can then, using that information, do whatever you want. You can give them a separate policy. You can block them with Facebook, or block them with Firewall. You can give them anything you want. You can do separate bandwidth control stuff. So you can use their Facebook authentication username just like you could any normal username, be it from Captain Portal, local directory, or Active Directory, or whatever. So in that sense, it's no different than any other type of username. Once it's associated with that host, it's associated with that host, and you can create any rule based on username that you'd like. So yes. All right, I'm going to keep moving on. We just have a couple more small things. Devices and host are now saved on the disk, which is cool. It's periodically saved, and when you reboot, it saves it before it reboots. So it won't forget all the information about host when you reboot. This has always been true of devices. So devices are kind of, this is a table that shows all the devices it's ever seen on the network, where it last saw them, and the host name associated with that device, so that if we ever see that device again, we automatically know the host name, even if it doesn't tell us, things like that. And you can go in here and say, I want to give this device a username, so that you always know the username associated with that device. You don't have to do Captain Portal and things like that. So that's all now saved on disk. They're added the ability to download language packs. So now straight from the UI, you can say, I want this language pack, and it'll go out and download that language pack immediately and install it. So that's much easier if you're a non-English speaker. It'll download the newest language pack directly from our language server, poodle.untangle.com. And again, if you speak another language, please go help us with our translations. As you can see, some of our translations are fairly well done, and some of them are not. But again, you can click on these, and you can go in and translate strings for us. There's a fix about WAN balancer in 12.1 that will help people with multiple WANs that are running over VPN. We upgraded the snort underneath the covers for intrusion prevention. Fixed a couple issues, a couple wireless issues. And now the root password is correctly restored. The root password by default is set to whatever the admin password is if you have an admin account. If you don't have an admin account, it doesn't set the root password. That's just a convenience thing. You can obviously set the root password to whatever you like, but now it will set it to the admin account when you restore. So it saves basically the password hash for root, and as a convenience, it will restore the root password when you restore if you have an admin account. If you don't, then it's not going to do anything. We also now log the HTTP refer. This is actually pretty cool. This is more of an experiment to see how it goes. We now log the refer with every single web event. So if I click on web filter and I go down here to all web events, this is all the same data, but now there's a new column that logs the refer. So that's cool for a lot of reasons because, well, this is all HTTPS, so it doesn't have much information here. But you can now see what refer caused that web request. So you can do things like, I want to know when the refer is null, which basically means nobody referred me, or you maybe want to ignore referrers because you only want to see web requests that were, quote, explicit, or you just want to know a specific web request and if it was part of another web page. So for example, let's say you were looking at your students' thing and one of them went to Playboy, and it was just an image on the Playboy site. Well, now you can see if maybe they just visited another website that happened to be a referrer that loaded an image from Playboy, which is a little different than them saying, typing in, playboy.com into their browser. So now you can go into that data and see a little bit more about where this web request actually came from. We also now log the policy rule ID that caused the session to go to that policy, which is useful if you have a lot of policies and you're trying to debug your policy rules. Now you can see, wait, why did the session go to this policy? Oh, because of this rule. So that's now stored in every single session to allow you to track which policy rule made that decision and adjust as necessary. And we've added some support for more country domains. And we're still having some issues with this, so we're looking into this right now. But basically, when you go to top domains, you don't want to see that co.uk is a top domain. So there needs to be some sort of intelligence about special countries that use, let me go top domains by size. Well, so we're in the US, so we don't, but if you were, say, British, often the top domain will be co.uk, but that's not very useful because co.uk isn't really a domain. You want to know foo.co.uk or something like that. South Africa is another one. Brazil's another one. So basically what we use is these special cases that we're near in a country, or when the domain is a country that happens to support 3-level domains, use the 3rd level instead. So we're still working on that. For you, those of you in those countries, it's definitely an important feature. So it should be much better in 12.1. And I think that's most of the important stuff. Obviously, there's tons of other changes. And again, 12.1 is a rolling release. So over the next couple weeks, the upgrades will be coming out. And if you have a 12.0 server, you will see the upgrade is available. But you don't need to do anything. You can just wait and click upgrade. If you have auto upgrades on, it will automatically upgrade. It's not a huge upgrade. So essentially, it'll happen within 12.0 was a massive upgrade. So what had happened is a database conversion, and it could take upwards of an hour. This is a much smaller upgrade. So when you're excluding the download time, it'll probably take a couple minutes, on which time no network traffic is down, everything's still fine, everything still passes. So if you have auto upgrade on, it'll probably just happen without you noticing it. If you don't have auto upgrade on, you can go in there and you'll see an alert that'll say upgrade available, or you can just go to config upgrade and check for upgrades and apply the upgrade manually when it's available to your server. And again, if you'd like to get access to it now, you can always reach out to us and we can help you. Give me a few seconds to read the last questions. There's a bunch of questions. I think most of them have been answered by our team that are on hand. Thank you, everybody, for jumping on. We really appreciate everything you've done. Let me jump back to the slides real quick. I think we covered all this, and Shannon had a couple things to announce as well.
Hey everyone, I know we probably didn't get to every question, but we tried to. If you have further feedback on new features or anything, hit us up on the forums or support. Just in case you guys didn't know, Sysadmin Day, we like to recognize the sysadmins everywhere throughout the world. So Sysadmin Day is the end of the month, July 29th. So for the next 2 weeks, we're running a sweepstakes on our Twitter, and you can enter in to win by simply just retweeting the 10 most notorious hacks that have come of late. So check out our Twitter page. Information about this contest sweepstakes will be in the follow-up email that we'll send out tomorrow with the recording of this webinar. And then just a few resources. I know everyone wants everything in terms of documentation or videos and etc. So we have a variety of resources for you. This webinar was recorded, so it'll be posted on our YouTube channel. We have a release page as well on our website that goes through all the details. We have the wiki, which Dirk mentioned, as well as the forums, which is a community for you to ask questions. We have the changelog, and we have tech talks every month that go through each individual application, especially the ones that are updated for these new releases. So check out our next upcoming ones. And as always, if you have any other questions, please reach out to us through support or sales. Again, we're happy to help answer any questions you may have or get you started or get you upgraded. So thanks again, Dirk, for the great webinar and the great demo. Thanks, team, for helping answer all the questions, and hopefully you guys are going to use version 12.1 soon and love the new features. Okay, thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.